You know, we all love a good birthday party, right? The cake, the candles, presents, the whole shebang. It just feels like one of those things that's always been around. But what if I told you that the real story behind your birthday celebration is, well, a lot more complicated and maybe even a little darker than you think?
Yeah, to us, it's just a fun, innocent party. But when you start digging into the historical accounts, you find something else entirely. It seems that underneath all that colorful wrapping paper and frosting, there's a hidden history, one that's all tangled up in ancient religion, magic, and, believe it or not, the worship of gods and even the self. Okay, so to really get how we got from there to here, we've got to go back. I mean, way back. Our journey kicks off almost 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. That's where we find the very first mention of anything like a birthday celebration in the historical record.
But here's the first major twist. This first ever birthday party, it wasn't for what you'd expect. The sources are pretty clear on this. It had nothing to do with the day the pharaoh was actually born. Instead, they were celebrating his coronation day, the day he was believed to transform and become born as a god. That divine change was the real party, the event that truly mattered.
All right, so if the first birthday was all about becoming a god, you're probably wondering, where do the cake and candles fit in? I mean, that's the best part, right? Well, for that piece of the puzzle, our historical trail takes a little trip, leaving Egypt and heading across the Mediterranean to ancient Greece.
And this is where things get really interesting. The cake and candles, they are directly tied to pagan rituals. You see, the ancient Greeks used to bake these round honey cakes as a tribute to Artemis, their goddess of the moon. And the lit candles on top, those were there to mimic the glowing radiance of the moon itself. The smoke that drifted up after you blew them out, that was believed to carry your prayers and wishes right up to the gods.
But what about the party? The friends, the gifts, the noise? Well, believe it or not, that might have started as a kind of spiritual security system. Ancient pagan cultures thought that a birthday, a day of major change in your life, left you wide open and vulnerable to evil spirits. So what do? You gather your friends and family around you to create this protective shield of good cheer. The gifts, they just add more of that positive energy. And the noisemakers, they were literally used to frighten those malevolent spirits away. Pretty wild, huh?
So, with all these connections to pagan gods and warding off evil spirits, it's probably not a huge surprise that the whole idea of a birthday party didn't go over so well in other ancient texts. Now, let's switch gears a bit and see how this tradition is looked at in the Bible and by some of the first Christian thinkers.
Get this, birthdays only show up twice in the entire Bible. And both times, well, they're not exactly happy memories. The first time, we're at a party for Pharaoh, and it ends with his chief baker getting executed. The second time, we're at King Herod's birthday bash, and that one wraps up with the beheading of John the Baptist. So in both cases, you have a party for a wicked king that ends in a pretty gruesome death. Not a great track record.
And this negative vibe wasn't just some subtle hint. Nope, early Christian leaders were very, very clear about how they felt. The famous theologian Origen Adamantius, writing way back in the 3rd century, flat out said that Christians should look at birthdays with disgust. To him, it was a pagan ritual, plain and simple, and something to be completely avoided. Okay, so let's recap this crazy historical thread we're following. We started with celebrating a pharaoh's birth as a god, then moved to pagan rituals with cakes and candles, and then saw how it was rejected in early scripture. All of this, it's leading us somewhere. It's leading to a much more modern and incredibly explicit philosophy that kind of ties this whole thing together. And here it is. This is a direct quote from the Satanic Bible written by Anton LaVey back in 1969. And it doesn't mince words. It says, "The highest of all holidays in the Satanic religion is the date of one's own birth." There's really no room for interpretation there. It's saying that your birthday is the #1 most important holiday in Satanism.
So, what's the thinking behind this? Well, the philosophy laid out in the book is basically this. Humans have a habit of creating gods that look and act a lot like them, right? So why not just be honest about it and make yourself the god you worship? The text literally states every man is a god if he chooses to recognize himself as one. And if you follow that logic, what's the most important day for this new god? Your birthday. It becomes your own personal high holy day.
So when you lay out all the pieces of this historical puzzle, the argument becomes pretty clear. The claim is that when we celebrate a modern birthday, with the cake, the candles, and all the focus on one person, we might be, completely without realizing it, echoing the traditions of 3 very specific groups: ancient pagan worshippers, those not-so-great biblical kings, and modern Satanists who are essentially celebrating themselves as their own god.
The round cake, lighting the candles, the silent wish, blowing them all out. We just do it without thinking. But this source argues that none of these things are random. Each one has a very specific and very non-Islamic history.
Now this is where it gets really wild. Check out the timeline the source lays out. It claims the first ever recorded birthday party wasn't for a prophet or some holy figure, but for an Egyptian pharaoh. Then it connects the whole cake and candles thing to a Greek pagan ritual. It even notes that early Christian thinkers condemned it for that exact reason, and then it brings it all the way to modern Satanism, which apparently calls the birthday its highest holiday.
This right here is the central piece of religious evidence for the whole thing. It's a hadith that's a verified saying from the Prophet Muhammad and a major source of guidance in Islam. The principle it sets up is really straightforward. If you intentionally copy the distinct ways of another group, then in that action, you're considered one of them.
Which, of course, leads to the big question. If celebrating a birthday is an act of imitation, then who exactly is being copied? And there's the answer, according to this perspective. The argument is that when someone goes through the ritual of a birthday party, they aren't just doing some neutral cultural thing. They are, maybe without even knowing it, imitating the practices of ancient pharaohs, Greek pagans, and even Satan worshippers. That's a heavy lift.
Brings in this second hadith, another saying from the Prophet to really drive the point home. The idea here is that your actions show what and who you love. They show who you want to be associated with. And the source poses a powerful question. On the Day of Judgment, who do you want to be standing with? So, to sum up this entire viewpoint we've explored, a birthday party isn't seen as just harmless fun. It's viewed as a religious ritual that has pagan origins. So based on those principles of avoiding imitation and choosing who you associate with, the conclusion this source draws is that it's not permissible for Muslims to celebrate that. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. You know, the argument we've just examined really challenges us to look beneath the surface of our normal, everyday traditions. It leaves you with a really compelling thought. What other things do we do, without even a second thought, that might have their own surprising, hidden histories?